Hi, everyone. My name's Grace Carrier. I work with the Brooklyn Climate Response Committee. And this, thanks. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about our committee, and then I'm going to tell you a little bit about this program. So the Brooklyn Climate Response Committee, based in Brooklyn, doing a bunch of climate change advocacy and action, which includes these community events. We also do a home visit program, which advises people on how to make their homes more energy efficient. So if you're interested in that, you can reach out to anyone, any of our committee members. The people giving the presentation, Peter Dugas and Adam Zemans from Citizen Climate Lobby, which is starting up a chapter in Blue Hill. And Citizen Climate Lobby is all about advocating for specifically carbon pricing in the United States, but just generally climate-friendly legislature. And it's going to be a great presentation, and we'll have time for questions. And that's all I'll say. Great.
Thanks, Grace. Am I cool to bring up my slides from this thing here?
Yes. So just share it.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Beautiful. Yes. I got it. Yep, thanks. Thank you so much, everybody. I appreciate it so much, Grace and Doug, for having us. It's always great to have an excuse to come up here, particularly when my daughter's down the street at Kneisel Hall at camp. So I scored by being able to have two reasons to be here. So yes, I'm Peter Dugas. I'm the main state coordinator for Citizens Climate Lobby. I'm also a different climate hat, a certified En-ROADS climate ambassador, which just means I've taken the online course in order to share with folks MIT's climate model, which we may get into if I have time, but I'm going to try to be quick because I know we want to get into a robust Q&A if that's possible and leave time for Adams as well. But briefly, Citizens Climate Lobby is a nonpartisan grassroots nonprofit organization centered on trying to get effective and equitable climate policy passed at the highest levels that meets the ambition of the challenge that we're facing. So let's see, how do I forward these? Oop, I guess I just did. Okay, so very briefly what we'll talk about today. First, we're going to talk specifically about carbon pricing, which Grace mentioned is kind of the cornerstone policy that Citizens Climate Lobby has been advocating for, and maybe we'll address why we're talking so much about this. We will touch briefly on some of the other policies that Citizens Climate Lobby has been working on. This is kind of fun because Adam and I are less than a week after Isaiah from coming back from DC, where we just had our lobby meetings. We had 470 something different lobby meetings out of the possible 535 lawmakers that we could meet with. We brought 40 Mainers down, which is far more than we could use for just the 4 congressional offices that we have with King, Collins, Pingree, and Golden. So we had folks in meetings with Texas, Oklahoma, Alaska, Arkansas, Nebraska, Maryland, all over the country. But we'll talk a little bit about that organization. I think I'll leave that to mostly Adam, but so why carbon pricing and how do we make carbon pricing not only effective, which we'll address first, but think about these 3 E's: effective, equitable, and expeditious, or how quickly can we get this done? And politically popular. And then finally, we'll talk a little bit specifically, wrap it back around to from the policy back to the organization. Why is it that Citizens Climate Lobby does what we do and what we're trying to do throughout the state and the country and internationally? Quickly, our values: we're trying to be focused on policy that's effective and equitable, integrity, relying on only peer-reviewed research, optimistic on trying to do something on climate, diversity, personal power, actually pulling ourselves. If folks involved with the organization long enough realize that they have a lot of leadership capacity or find themselves doing things that they wouldn't. I know shoegazing software engineers that now we're always afraid of having a conversation above a mumble but in front of other folks, now won't stop talking about climate policy because they've really come out of their shell. Relationship building and being nonpartisan. And then we talk specifically about these 5 different means of what we like to say, building the political will for a livable world. So lobbying Congress, which is the meat and potatoes, that's the glory job that Adam and I and Isaiah just came back from, where we actually met with our lawmakers. We do it 2 or 3 times a year in DC or over Zoom with our federal lawmakers. We also do regional, statewide level as well. Media relations, talking, writing op-eds, getting people to see climate policies talked more about in the common discourse, online, traditional media, grassroots outreach, kind of like what we're doing right now, or tabling at a farmer's market, getting people to know about our organization and other organizations that we affiliate with, grass tops engagement, which is actually it's a code word for basically talking to folks who represent community leaders or a lot of different folks. So your local priest or bishop or, or faith worship or house of worship head, business leaders, nonprofit heads, that kind of stuff. And then chapter development. In our 4 policies, we're going to spend specifically most of our time about the left because that's what we were instructed to do. But we also have been talking a lot about carbon pricing, clean energy permitting reform, which has actually been specifically this past lobby meeting was a big thing we were talking about. Healthy forests to access natural sequestration of legacy atmospheric carbon in the atmosphere, and then building electrification and energy efficiency. But a quick, very quick back of the envelope revision, just to look at where we are on the problem. I don't think anybody who's going to sacrifice a Monday evening in June really needs to go over this again, but just so we all are on the same page, we know where carbon dioxide levels atmospherically have been for the past 800,000 years. And of course, yes, it's true that it has gone up and down, as has temperatures, but you can see where our current level is far and above anything we've ever had in human history or long eons before that. We also know if we truncated that to just half of that, 400,000 years, the top number of CO2 concentration in the atmosphere runs parallel, like we can see that there's a relationship between where the CO2 concentration is and where global temperature is. As it goes ups and downs, you can see global temperature follows, and then of course sea level in the end. And if I could actually just move my window, you can see it's almost as if we plan to have this in the way so you can't see how scary it gets at the end. But that's where we are now, way above. And you can just imagine what that means for global temperatures and for sea level. Looking at a much shorter level, this is actually just each one of these kind of wiggly blue lines that gets gradually whiter is a year from 1950 till now. From left being January 1st to right being December 31st. And each day of the year, global temperature averages are wiggled across this, and the 0, which runs along the bottom. Sorry, this is kind of truncated on the screen, but there's a 0 line that actually is the pre-industrial or close to pre-industrial 1850 to 1900 range. And each line kind of wiggles and shows that predominantly we are beyond that level. And as the lines go from blue to white, we know that that's a more recent year. And most alarming is where we can see where 2023 is way above where we had been previously. So kind of off the charts here. But all of this data and numbers, let's just put this into something that we can kind of encapsulate in my mind. I can tell you that we have, this country is responsible for emitting X amount of tons of CO2 every year. If we put it in perspective that we can remember, and looking at the room, how many people here remember when, Grace, don't raise your hand, when Mount St. Helens exploded in 1980? Just raise your hand if you remember this. Okay. That sent up 540 million tons of particulate matter. So much garbage into the air, so much of that mountaintop blew up so that the other side of the state, Spokane, Washington, for the rest of that afternoon and days afterwards, the day turned to night. It turned into like basically a geological eclipse. 540 million tons of particulate matter. People could put buckets in their backyard in Spokane and they'd collect ash. If we converted that much, 540 million tons of particulate matter into just CO2, the United States emits a Mount St. Helens, just the United States, a Mount St. Helens every 16 minutes. So in the course of our talk tonight, we'll probably be doing about 6 Mount St. Helens, maybe 5 because we got a late start. But Well, I would argue that's the depressing part. The good news is, and I would argue, we live in the most influential corner of the most influential country on this global existential crisis. And you may say, why? Little old Maine, which is responsible for this tiny little portion of greenhouse gas emissions, 0.27%. If Governor Mills could wave a magic wand and make all of that emissions go away, we would still, lobsters would likely, we would lose that just like we lost Maine shrimp 10 years ago. But we are uniquely in position to advocate for federal policy that has international ramifications because of these two folks on the left. Maine is the only state of the 50 with both of our senators on the bipartisan Senate Climate Solutions Caucus. There are 12 members of that caucus. If we look at this, I'm a sucker for graphs. So that little gray wedge is what Maine is responsible for out of the total of US emissions, not global, just US, 0.27%. But on the right, that green, light green wedge is we have 2 out of the 12 members of the Bipartisan Senate Climate Solutions Caucus. New York has 20 times our population. Texas has 30 times our, roughly. California, roughly 40 times our population. They have 0, all of them together. And Maine has both of these. So it's an unequal system. You know, there's six Republicans, 6 Democrats plus King. Or sorry, King counts as a Democrat in that equation. So what we can do, a lot of the good things that we have recently passed, like the bipartisan infrastructure law, the CHIPS Act, which had a bunch of climate provisions within it, and of course, what everybody knows 2 years ago, which passed by the slimmest of margins and the tightest of years, the Inflation Reduction Act, which was a record-breaking allocation of funds to try to avert climate disaster. A lot of those ideas came from that bipartisan group, particularly the infrastructure stuff. So, but we have a lot more to do. Sorry, I'm not sure why this is probably just the way the screen is shared. Just going to move this. Well, anyways, you can see that the United States, it may be surprising to you that in fits and starts, our emission levels are kind of going down from 2000 to this current year. But you can see the projection. Here we were where that line ended, and you can see before the Inflation Reduction Act, we were in this band of blue, 24 to 35% greenhouse gas emissions reductions by 2030, the target year where we said we were going to get to half in Paris in 2015. Inflation Reduction Act brought us even lower, someplace in that margin. This actually probably has been updated recently, but you can see there's still a gap. We need more to do in order to get to that. Did everyone see it? Okay, good. So let's talk a little bit about En-ROADS. Is everybody with me so far? So far, so good? Okay. This is one of the reasons I use En-ROADS so much is because I find it like uniquely helpful in showing why we emphasize different policies the way we do. So this is it in a nutshell. You can see that this graph here on the right shows, I'm trying to move these things so you can see everything well. I'll move it there. If we look at En-ROADS and see that where global temperatures are on this right-hand side, you can see where we were as a global average. This is an MIT model that's put out, has nothing to do with Citizens Climate Lobby. I just like to use it because it's a way of us discussing and seeing how these things work. You can see where we were at average temperature increases from pre-industrial levels of 0.8 degrees centigrade. Here we are now, roughly 1.3 degrees, 1.4 degrees. And you can see these dashed lines. Anybody know where those dashed lines are across there? What those mean? At 1.5 degrees centigrade or 2 degrees centigrade, basically this is where the international community has promised we would keep our temperatures below to avoid feedback loops, after which they're triggered. We will have little control over things. So like the albino effect, or wildfires that put even more emissions in the atmosphere. So we're trying to keep these global temperatures below this dashed line. And it looks like with business as usual, we will be eclipsing that by around the end of the decade and hitting 3.3 degrees by 2100, which is no good. So we're trying to bend this curve down. So and this is like the shortest version of this. I will try to keep this very short. But if you were to look at this model, you could throw out other ideas to see On this left-hand side, all those different colors are where coal, oil, and natural gas, how much they make up for the world's energy consumption. Coal is the dirtiest and most plentiful fossil fuel. That's one we should be most worried about. After that, oil and natural gas. And then you can see bioenergy is kind of this pink line, renewables. It's good news that they're projecting that this is going to be increasing by the end of the century. Nuclear power kind of hugging the bottom here. And all of these sliders basically govern whether we're incentivizing or disincentivizing all of those different things. And where those dots lie on the sliders, whether it be coal, oil, natural gas, bioenergy, renewables, nuclear, basically saying, well, I'm doing a little bit to incentivize renewables, but I could be doing a heck of a lot more. Or with coal, I could be doing a lot more to disincentivize coal. And God forbid, I could do a little more to incentivize, right? Does that make sense? So one of the things we could talk about, and I'll do this very quickly, is just throw out ideas that you might think might have an effect on this. And I can go through the top 4 or 5 things that come up most frequently if you wanted to see that, just in comparison. Electric vehicles. Thank you, Alan. So perfect. So if I grab one thing to remember, this is a global model. So what may be very good for Maine, and I'm an electric vehicle driver and a strong believer in it, if we were to just extrapolate that single policy over the whole world, what would it mean? So maybe whisper to a friend what you think this number will go down to, the temperature increase, when I grab electric vehicles and slide it all the way over to see. You get 2 seconds. 2, 1, 0. Okay. Ready? If I move this over, what am I looking on the left? Oh, I like seeing the renewables go up, right? I can actually, there's a fancy little toggle I can do, go back and forth and say renewables have gone up and oil has gone down. All good news. But what else has gone up? If this was only policy we had, remember, the whole world isn't as blessed to have a relatively clean electrical grid like Maine. If we're just moving from gas-powered vehicles to electric vehicles, we're asking for more electricity, which in some way means, a lot of parts of the world means more coal, particularly in the developing parts of the world. So which is why that's, over the whole planet, we'd have to do many policies in addition to that. Other great suggestion. What's another one? Thank you. Okay, that's a good one. So if I grab agricultural emissions right here and slide this all the way down, so this is a lot of regulatory means of pushing this down. A lot of it is just from waste and how we're raising. You can see what's happened here. We've shaved off 1/10 of a degree, which is, any step in the right direction is good. I always say, depending on the audience, I say it's always good. I welcome you to open this up. One of the reasons this model is so exciting is that it's very sobering about what has to happen, but it's constantly being updated by the latest research from the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. And it's free. They're putting this out for us to take a look at so we can play around with this. Now, you may want to have a chilled bottle of wine in the fridge or rosary beads in your pockets or something to get you through how difficult it is to kind of get to where we need to be. But you can see, you'll see in a second why I think this is important. What's another policy? Yes. Yes. Okay, great. Yes. Okay, excellent. So that's any of these policies, and this is going to be a kind of a 30,000 view look at this. But for coal, oil, and natural gas, all of these I'm looking at these as kind of like a qualitative look because I'm not associating any numbers. If I want to dig into actually where the numbers are coming from, I click on the 3 dots of any of those little subsets. Whoops. And that should, I don't know your computer very well. There it is. If I click on this, I can actually scroll down and see exactly what kind of numbers are associating, what peer-reviewed studies. You can really climb Nerd Mountain if you wanted to. Say that again. Light tap. Okay, thank you. I'll be lighter. So if I actually just kind of went to here and just, let's say I'm actually for just coal, let's for purpose of that, disincentivize it, which is a way of saying pulling away the subsidies. I could bring this down, and that did eat quite a bit into this. So I bent that curve down. Notice, so coal's gone way down. Notice what's happened around it. So yes, renewables went up, but also, gas and oil picked up a bit around it as well. So you can see the challenge of trying to get to a 2-degree or 1.5-degree future. It's very, very difficult. The reason why, and you can even say, like, another one that comes up often is incentivizing renewables, much of which is what we kind of passed in the Inflation Reduction Act and the infrastructure bill before that. A lot of goodies, a lot of carrots to move markets in that direction, which is something we should celebrate. If I just grab this renewables and slide it over, I love seeing it pick up the market there. And you may be surprised, and this is why coal goes down quickly right after we've incentivized, made it cheaper for people to go to solar and wind and hydro. Coal goes down, but what happens over time? Notice how it kind of starts rebounding, it starts climbing back up again. And this is an important, go ahead. Okay, this is an important lesson for why we have to think about this as an integrated system. Because if we are merely taking making it cheaper to go with renewables, we're not thinking about how the market would affect this. What happens to the price of coal when everyone's buying solar panels and wind turbine power and hydropower because that's gotten cheaper? What happens to all that coal that's used to go to the market that's just sitting there? The demand goes down, so the price goes down. And then what happens when the price goes down low enough? It starts getting attractive again, which is why, especially now after we've passed a lot of that stuff with the Inflation Reduction Act, at which David and Adam and a lot of us with Citizens Climate Lobby, we were meeting with lawmakers, including Joe Manchin and Kristen Sinema, 2 weeks before that passed. We were trying really hard we were one vote shy from getting the cornerstone policy, and the what's in the title of this talk is why we need a carbon price. If we were to actually add that, so this is a single policy, we shaved off, the best we did was taking away the subsidies for coal, right? Or like really incentivizing coal. If we actually include a carbon price, of which, as we speak, the United States is the only developed nation without some form of price on industrial carbon pollution. We were one vote shy from getting this included in the Inflation Reduction Act. But if we put a price on carbon, started off at a modest price of $15 a ton of CO2, which if you think about a gallon of gas, it's about 10, 11 cents on a gallon of gas starting in the first year. But it goes up every year predictably and persistently on every fossil fuel, proportional to how dirty it is when you consume it, how much emissions go in the atmosphere over the course, starting this year, ramping up every year. And there's 76 years left in the century. So 76 years by $10 a year, this is conservatively, 76 years times $10 a year is, math quiz, 76 years, $10 a year is, who's with me? 760 plus the initial $15 gives us 775. And you can see this price, as it gradually increases, brings us up to this point. I don't know why this is going. So you can see, yes, there is no policy there is no magic bullet that's going to get us all the way there. But this does about 3 or 4 times more than any other single policy, because it does 2 things. It puts a big wet blanket over coal, oil, and natural gas, proportional how dirty they are. So look at coal goes down the steepest. And it allows the other things that have no carbon emissions to start ramping up, which is why renewables goes up so drastically. If we coupled that with your agricultural emissions taking down methane, both from agricultural means and from leaks in natural gas lines, I don't know why that keeps coming up, I'm sorry, Grace, then we can get to that magic 2-degree number. And then we can start talking about, okay, now we can talk about slowing down the rate at which we're cutting down the world's forests, maybe planting some trees, and then we're within shouting distance of that 1.5, okay? That's the quickest En-ROADS presentation I could possibly give. There's longer ones if you want. I can point you to where they go. Play with it yourself, but no other policy does as much as that gradually increasing price on carbon, okay? 2 big things is no silver bullet. There's only silver buckshot. We need a lot of things to go right. But as the UN has said in every statement since the turn of the century, a carbon price is a quote unquote necessary condition for stabilizing the climate. In other words, with a carbon price, we can have success on climate. Without it, we kind of can't. Okay, I'm going to quickly go back to my slides, and I know I'm running out of time. Sorry. So the big question then is, So let's just, just some more data on, maybe you don't trust the En-ROADS model. You can look at what Great Britain did. In 2013, they joined the growing international movement to price industrial carbon pollution. And you can see what happened. They've lost 61% in 6 years, a steep decline in coal generation. If you took, there's a 20-year study of 142 countries, 43 of which had a carbon price and 99 without. In the 43 with a carbon price, emissions crested and started falling. In the 99 without, 80% of those continued. They had some other policy and they continued to increase emissions. But the big question is, that's the effectiveness. How do we do this so that it doesn't hurt poor people or middle income people, or doesn't have incredible political blowback? Just ask Emmanuel Macron what happened when he started escalating the carbon price in France a few years ago, and they triggered the Gilets jaunes movement. Well, what we like, there's a number of carbon prices, kind of an umbrella term. We have plain old carbon tax. We have a cap and trade system, which is what the Europeans have had for 20 years. Better than nothing. We wish we had that, but we can do better. It's not perfect. And we actually like what the Canadians have adopted, which a cashback carbon price or carbon fee and dividend on industrial carbon emissions. So the only people who actually pay for it are the folks who are pulling it out of the ground, and it's proportional to how much they pull out. So basically, we know how much coal, oil, and natural gas comes out of the ground. We know the carbon content when we burn it, and that dividend, so we have that gradually increasing price in those Canadian tar sands, oil fields, port of entry, wherever it might be. And 100% of that revenue is turned into a dividend check for every man, woman, and child in Canada. If we were to take a road trip across Route 1 in Calais and go into Edmonds, wherever the town, what is it, St. Stephen's, I guess, every Canadian in New Brunswick is getting $736 back per year in carbon dividends, paid for without increasing the taxes outside of what the polluters are paying. So basically, fee on the polluters, money back to people so that they can make themselves, so they can adjust. I'm going to skip this because I know I'm running out of time. Yes, go ahead.
How that carbon tax and the cash given back to the citizens reduces the amount of petroleum products that are burned.
Yeah. So you can do, it's a simple policy when you think about it. It's just the ramifications of like what this means. So if I'm getting a dividend check back, I could be foolish and put a down payment on my next car. It could be a Hummer, something like really, but I know that the price of gas is going up predictably and persistently every year. So it'd be foolish for me to do this. Now, there's nothing preventing someone from doing a foolish thing like that. But why would they do it if they know that it's predictable and persistent? More importantly, it changes the burden, the carbon, the carbon footprint of all the products I buy. Everybody in this room, I'm sure, frets about like, do I buy this soft drink or this, because I'm worried about like the carbon content associated with every product and every good I buy. It changes the burden from me, us, the consumer, to the supply side, to the folks who are actually supplying the goods and services for us, because they are much more sensitive to price fluctuations. And they know that if the fee is going to go up every year, they're either innovating ourselves away from carbon emissions for the life cycle of their products, or they're going to lose out to the competition who has figured it out. Does that make sense? So the businesses will all change their ways. So it's basically the way that it has worked is by associating that dividend comes back to folks. It actually allows them an ability to invest in a new heat pump or hot water heat pump or whatever it might be, if they're smart about this and they know that that fee is going up every year, so their fossil fuel addictions get broken. We actually have shown this. This is just a graph broken down for every 20% of income level. So the bottom 20% is down here. And the richest on the top side, bottom 20%, it's taxable income. So that green number is just in your first year, the calculated carbon dividend. And because it's taxable income, it goes down because you're in a richer tax bracket. And yes, you will have some associated costs that will rise, but which is the 273 number, which goes up. But you can see that everybody under 60% income level benefits. And as the policy goes on, that gulf increases. so that we'd get more dividend checks. The price goes up, so the dividend increases. So, and don't feel too bad for the folks at the top end because it's less than $600. And they can most easily afford to decarbonize their lifestyle, take fewer flights to the Bahamas or, but, invest in that electric vehicle or invest in that solar farm or whatever it might be. Does that make sense? Yeah.
Federal government, continue to subsidies for the people who produce the coal.
Right. And that's a big question that comes up often enough is, and gets to your question is like, can we repeal some of those subsidies? It's actually proven to be easier because some of those things go back generations, or it's easier to actually just overwhelm them with this carbon price. I mean, I put a carbon price in that was going to be $850 per ton of CO2 by the end of the century, adjusted for inflation. That will overwhelm any kind of subsidy that we're applying to them. It's easier to pass a new law that overwhelms them than it does to repeal. Good questions, though. I want to save some Q&A for the end because I know I'm probably already on time. We've actually modeled this within the state of Maine, and you can see that the majority of the interior parts, a greater proportion of households in the poorer interior parts of the state do better than us folks in Portland and, other places where there's more wealth. You may ask, where has this been successful? And the answer is everywhere it's been tried. Our favorite model, of course, is in Canada, where the British Columbia started out with a policy for 7 years of having a carbon price before the rest of Canada adopted it as the backstop policy. In those years, their consumption of carbon emissions decreased by 10% in those 7 years, while their economic growth increased, decoupling us from the old fact that you needed to have emissions to have a strong economy, because a lot of that dividend check coming back meant people had cash in hand. It was redistributive because it was like allowed for local economies to grow. I'll skip this, but basically it's impervious to judicial review because this Supreme Court particularly, we know they're going to take a hatchet to anything that comes up that's regulatory or overstretches what the Constitution says, because the Constitution is very clear about the legislative branch has the power to levy fees and distribute funds. If you're an originalist interpreter of the Constitution, you can't touch it. And this is what's most exciting is that when this policy is explained to Democrats, 80% of them, according to Luntz polling, which is a conservative polling group, 80% of them support the policy. Amongst Republicans under 40 years old, it's nearly the same level of support. It's 75% support. Young Republicans are just as freaked out, or almost as freaked out about climate change as everyone else. And this checks a lot of boxes for them. So, and this is the part that's most exciting and reason why we find this to be inevitable is because, as I said at the beginning, the United States is the last developed nation without some form of industrial price on industrial carbon emissions. This is a map of the world showing all the countries in gray that don't have it. The different colors are either regional or domestic or some other international agreement to price carbon emissions. United States, because the Europeans have been escalating their carbon price so aggressively to get themselves off Russian oil for obvious reasons, they are now worried about how that might affect their local economy. So they are putting tariffs on goods or services coming in. Basically, they don't want German steel manufacturers to jump ship to Belarus or Saudi Arabia or the only developed nation where it's free to pollute still, the United States. So they put a tariff around their common market to prevent those industries from flying ship, because either there's whatever is going to import into our carbon market is going to have to pay the equivalent of that carbon price on the good or service. And that's actually moving more countries. China has now adopted a carbon price. It's far too low, but because of what the Europeans have done, they are actually escalating it. India is jumping ship on board too. Even Russia has considered it in the Duma, but the United States, again, 1 vote shy in the summer of 2022. These are on their way. I'm going to skip all this stuff. If you are sufficiently moved, let's just talk a little bit about what CCL does. And we didn't even talk about the other policies, but carbon pricing is the holy grail here. We are asking folks to send messages, particularly in Maine, where we have such sway as the only state with both senators on the Senate Climate Solutions Caucus, to ask them to support carbon fee and dividend. You can talk to your friends about climate solutions. You can publish letters to the editor in your local paper. You can join us at CCL. There's tons to learn and do. You can gather endorsements from community leaders, whether that be businesses that you're involved in, or people who are involved in, or your church or house of worship. You can join CCL in our lobby meetings, which is cut off by the bottom of the screen. This is a map of just in the past couple of years since this bill was live. We just celebrated our 30th Maine town to pass a municipal resolution supporting this. We'd love to have Blue Hill, Sedgwick, or Brooklyn, some of these other towns pass this as well. But you can see some of these towns are very progressive, but some of them towns are not, like Hamden, Maine, and Vian and Wilton. Some of these towns, I would say are purple, or if not red, but they have supported past, and it's nothing internal to the town. It's just asking, we're doing what we can as these freakish storms are creating an incredible expense on our public budget. We need some help from the federal level. We like this policy because it helps out middle incomes and low income folks too. And I'll leave it at that. And I'm skipping these last slides. Is that okay? You do? Well, that's Blue Hill. Did someone misname it? Oh. Oh. Clever. Okay. All right. I'll hand this over to Adam, who's the local fella here. So here, can I do this? Get you started. Do you want me to spread your slides, please?
We will have time for Q&A. And actually, there's one other slide that might be interesting for people, which is the result from many of the countries that have, I think you have that slide. Yeah. So all the results overall, which I think people would be interested in. But thank you, everybody. It's great to see some numbers out here. Brooklyn's committee has a way of attracting people, and that's awesome. Let's see. Okay. Just an inspirational quote to think about before I start my presentation. This is actually also the subject of my dissertation as relates to the Maine Climate Council. But trust is a huge issue in this work, as you'll see in this presentation. I just wanted to put that out there. So I'm going to go over all my tips just to start out the outline and then hit each one of them afterwards. So these are my 7 suggestions overall. Be a policy expert or a team with one. However, KISS and much more. KISS is keep it simple. I say silly instead of a bad word. Build and maintain relationships with at least 50% of your effort. In other words, it's not all about policy. 50% of it is about building relationships. Value and leverage intergenerational and diverse teamwork. I put the 2 stars next to the 2 asterisks next to the teamwork because it's a whole nother subject that I could spend a lot of time on how to develop teams and how we can work together as teams. A grand coalition, big umbrella is crucial to avoid the worst climate impacts. And that's part of the underlying philosophy of CCL that we focus a lot on. And I'll get a little bit more into that in the presentation. Be a possibilist. It's got to be fun, and time and planning are of the essence. Those are, in a nutshell, the 7 suggestions. This is just a little bit of stuff about me. Basically, my background is for most of my adult life in Bolivia. I started working on climate change in 2006. I ran a small organization down there. I've come full circle to be working on going back to school now after many years, and I'm focused my dissertation on climate change now. Particularly, I used to look at Bolivian, Chinese, and US climate diplomacy. And also just about the tips in general. I'm presenting conceptual tips rather than kind of technical tips. And the reason for that is kind of akin to, I love martial arts. I practiced martial arts for a long time. Like if you just teach somebody to punch or kick, you don't really teach them martial arts. They have to know the purpose and the strategy behind it, the spirit behind the form, essentially. And that's why I chose to do conceptual tips. So a little bit on being a policy expert. Policy expertise is super important and leads to a lot of credibility and trust. However, relationship building, as I said, is huge. I just wanted to show this Citizens Climate Lobby 1-pager as an example of kind of how you need to crystallize climate expertise to the most simple level in order to influence within legislatures. This is an example of a sheet that we used, a one-sheeter that we used when we went to DC to lobby just days ago. And really, when you realize how busy the Congress people are and the staff, it becomes clear that having these kind of tools is really important. And the other thing to emphasize here is just that you don't have to be a policy expert. There are many roles, which I'll talk about in a minute. It's just good to have somebody who really knows their policy on the team. This is really, this was a talk at the DC conference that I absolutely loved, which is focused on emotions as an element of getting the trajectory down on climate emissions, rather than just kind of like the typical policy that Peter was showing. I'll get into that in a second. And then also another element that I wanted to focus on is Van Jones' keynote address from our conference last year, which talks about reward and punishment in addition to policy as being very important. Basically, you can think of kind of reward and punishment as the truly political part of the process rather than the policy part of the process. And it's often neglected in terms of our work. Like, for example, to be more concrete about it, how many members do we have in the district? How many members who can really move the congressperson do we have in the district, et cetera? So this brought a lot of interest and laughter to the crowd in DC. It's basically a takeoff on the En-ROADS model, but we're determining how, what are our temperature projections going to be if we have anger at a high level, hatred at a high level, contempt at a high level, and fear at a high level. And I think it speaks to a profound truth, which is, in my personal opinion, we have all the technology that we need to solve the problem. We have the policies that we need to solve the problem, but we don't have the human cooperation at this point in time by far to solve the problem. So this is one of our state leaders, John Sabin, who came up with this. You can probably guess that he has a therapeutic background. And now he, changing those levers as Peter did with the policies, we get the empathy up, curiosity, acceptance, compassion, and we get the temperature leveled off. This relates to how we approach our meetings, the respect that we bring to our meetings, the bipartisanship that we bring to our meetings with Congress people and others at the grassroots, at the grass tops, the listening that we try to bring to those meetings and communications. And then getting back to the Van Jones keynote, as he points out in that keynote, which I highly recommend, you can find it on YouTube. Again, it's about our ability to reward and punish upon which legislation success hinges. The example that he brought up in that keynote was the American Clean Energy and Security Act of 2009. Many of you might remember that it failed to pass under the Obama administration. And the political moment at that time was, I would say, even in spite of the financial crisis that preceded it, the political moment was much more ripe than we have now. So really, I think that should lead us to a very big umbrella coalition-based strategy for what we do. At that time, when that legislation was attempted, there were huge corporations that were in favor of cap and trade under that legislation, and yet the legislation still couldn't pass. And if you think about carbon pricing politically, I don't know if Peter would agree with me, but basically, like I consider carbon pricing to be left of cap and trade legislation. So that would suggest, in some regards, that it would be even a more difficult political initiative to pull off than cap and trade, even though there's really good reasons to do it instead of cap and trade. We can get into that a little bit in the, and one of those reasons is simplicity and effectiveness. Lack of administrative costs is another, but it does require a big umbrella and coalition-based approach, which then leads to a bunch of other strategic tips and considerations. So one of those for me is intergenerational cooperation. Another is diversity. As I say here, young people have all kinds of knowledge, skills, and abilities that older people don't, and vice versa. I say the best is a combo sandwich between those. The young are the biggest stakeholders and generally have the most passion. Diversity meets the need for a grand coalition, a big umbrella strategy. I'd like to introduce my son, who for the first time ever became involved with climate change, and he's going to just speak for a minute to say what his experience was at the DC conference and lobbying. He, among other things, he got a chance to meet the keynote speaker, who is Jerome Foster II, who's the youngest White House environmental advisor in history. But Isaiah, go for it.
Hi, my name is Isaiah Zemans. I'm Adam's son. Yeah, so basically before this conference in DC, I wasn't really aware of anything about climate change and climate advocacy. My dad has been doing it since I was a kid, maybe since I was born. But then he convinced me to go to DC, and I don't regret it at all. It was an amazing experience. At first, I was a bit intimidated because there were so many young kids my age that knew so much about it. But everybody was so supportive and friendly. I got to meet a lot of very interesting and cool people. I got to meet Jerome, and he was like super inspiring. So now I'm inspired to do much more than I was before. I got to learn a lot as well about carbon pricing. We had meetings throughout the 4 days about different topics in climate change and climate advocacy. And then on the last day, we got to lobby. And that was really interesting. It was my first time doing it. I got to meet some of the representatives of Maine and stuff, and talk to them about all the policies and things that we want to change. And yeah, I would recommend the conference to anybody, even if you're already advanced and know a lot about climate change. There's always something you can learn, and if you're just beginning, it's super helpful. So yeah.
So I just have some team photos here. So one thing I say here is you are not alone, except very early in the morning. This is very early in the morning. Isaiah is headed towards the Congress there. Thanks to immense generosity by David Dietrich, who's in the audience here, as well as another member of our chapter, Matt Tucker, and John Marshall, who's also in the audience here, we were able to fund 4 young Bolivians, in addition to a family member there, to come up from Bolivia. They paid for their own flights, but we funded the rest, the food and the conference fees and the local transportation, and the housing. It was a great experience for them. They want to start a chapter in Bolivia, and they also were very welcomed, even by the Congress people. You would think that, like, maybe Congress people would be scared to receive foreigners. There's no law against it, and they loved it. So we were extremely well supported in terms of our training from the beginning. Right there is a senior person, full-time staff member, I believe she's a full-time staff member, but her name is, I think her last name is Dash. She posed as a congresswoman, and then all of us at the table there took on our roles and basically learned how to do the process of lobbying as a team. We practiced it. We did a mock lobbying, and that was extremely helpful. So then we went into our meetings as actual teams, already prepared, knowing kind of what we needed to do and what we wanted to do. And I did a fair amount of lobbying in my youth on the Hill, but I had never done something so sophisticated with a big team like this. And it was amazing. This breaks down the roles for the lobbyists, and something that, even if you don't want to participate in CCL, you could use on your own for whatever group you're going with. We had a leader, appreciator, time monitor, note taker, that talks a little bit about our discussion. We had 2 types of askers. We had primary askers, and then we had secondary askers. So the primary was, our chief goals. The secondary was for potentially stuff that the Congress people would consider if they didn't agree to our chief goals, or if they already did and we just didn't need to talk about it because they were fully on board already. A deliverer, a listener, a photographer, and then someone to do follow-up. And this is the kind of the standard meeting agenda for a lobbying meeting, broken into beginning, middle, and end. There's a thank you, that's very important. Time check. We really try to stay on time, respect their time. Introductions, appreciation is, I think they very much appreciate appreciation given how much they don't get that in general. Purpose, making the ask, asking open-ended questions, listening and learning, and that's a big part of our philosophy. Listen for a response and then determine the follow-up. And follow-up is also extremely important. Basically, like if you think about it, I actually meant to put a slide in here about just making their lives easier. That one pager is an example of making their lives easier, but also if you provide appropriate and timely follow-up, you can make their lives a lot easier. They're super extended and busy, and just that alone is enough to potentially change, slightly subtly change their positions. It's not about just trying to absolutely change their mind, but it's about helping them to achieve the best decisions for their district. This is us in the meeting with Senator Collins. A 15-year-old Bolivian girl is on the left. And we have a professor of astronomy and physics from the University of Maine, Peter Garrett, who's the former state coordinator. Then on the right of Senator Collins, Teresa Hainer, I believe it is, from Bangor, who's a nurse, myself, Casey Gilbert, who's moved over from Wisconsin. And she was really like our chief asker, along with the professor from University of Maine. Her mind is very youthful, and she picks up all of the subtleties and nuances. I'm getting old, and my policy expertise isn't quite as good as it used to be. So I just kind of deferred to the two of them for the asking. And then Aldo Wakana, I think is his name, is another member of the main group.
Climatologist from the University of Bujumbura in Burundi.
Oh, wow.
Also a climate refugee now living in
Oops, sorry about that. So this is kind of another, I would say, like prototypical picture in the sense that a lot of the time is spent with senior staff. The woman on the left is Molly Ross. She's a senior staffer. She's worked for Collins for 8 years. We put in 40 minutes with her, and then we put in 15 minutes with Collins. I do think that the time with Collins was very important because sometimes the staffers can get lost in details. But the senator or the congressperson in a flash, just because they decide that it's the right thing to do, can change the staffer's mind as well. So it's not a one-way relationship with a staffer. In this case, we were lobbying particularly on the Prove It Act, which has to do with data collection regarding carbon emissions. And I felt like we did make some progress directly with the senator because she realized, well, this is a very innocuous bill. It's not going to cost me much politically. It's got bipartisan support, and it's already passed through EPW committee in the Senate, the Environmental and Public Works Committee. So maybe we actually, made a difference that day with Senator Collins. And this is one of the first things that we did. I think that's out of order slide, but that is a bunch of stuff that we're giving her that's showing support from the constituents that we collected from other constituents. So like letters, postcards, endorsements. If you can get all that stuff, it's very helpful and appreciated. And she had a nice exchange with this young woman from Bolivia, which was fun to see. And you just kind of can see, this expresses the kind of the tone of the meeting. And we have people in there who completely disagree with Collins on many issues, as you can imagine, but that's not our purpose for being there. And we always keep it cordial and respectful regardless. And yeah, just getting back to the notion of the big umbrella, unprecedented cooperation at all levels is needed to avoid the worst impacts of climate change. When I say unprecedented cooperation, I mean cooperation at all levels. So micro, like in a meeting like this, meso, group level, macro, diplomacy, multiple countries. And then also north-south cooperation is tremendously important in order to be able to provide countries of the South with the resources that they need in order to be able to solve the problem. Okay, and also, of course, the big, maybe you could say elephant in the room, US-Chinese cooperation is absolutely essential. So it can be very daunting, as Peter was talking about, when you play with En-ROADS, when you play with M-ROADS as well, it can be very daunting. These are two sources of information that I've really appreciated recently. One is a book by William Ury. He's the academic who wrote the book. You might have heard of his book that he co-wrote, authored, Getting to Yes. It's the most famous book in negotiation, pretty much. And he just came out with this book. His argument is slightly a tweak on what CCL believes. CCL believes in optimism. I believe in possibilism, personally. CCL allows us to have our own opinion. So possibilism is you're not an optimist, you're not a pessimist, you're a possibilist. And a possibilist is somebody that believes that even if you have a 5% chance, you got to give it the same kind of enthusiasm and energy as you would if you were an optimist. And the good thing about being a possibilist is that it's a great argument against pessimists, because like this friend of mine who is a former colleague from Bolivia who knows a tremendous amount about climate change, for example, he posted on my Facebook when I was talking about CCL that, come on, Adam, we're going to hit 2 degrees just based on the lag in the environment. You got to be kidding. What are you doing? And I'm like, well, I'm a possibilist. If there's a 5% chance, then I have the responsibility to my children and my friends' children, my relatives' children, and us even now, because it's coming on that fast, to do whatever I can do. And also just kind of like a shout out to the work of Dr. Susan Arnold at the Island Institute, who is also one of the 2 leading scientists on the Maine Climate Council's Scientific and Technical Committee. In the last meeting, I think Alan Kratz, you were there at the last meeting, where she's a natural scientist, but she's chosen to spend a significant amount of research time and probably money for the Island Institute on hope and the science of hope. And what struck me about what she said was that there were maybe about 10 people who referred to what she said in the meeting after she said it. And a lot of these folks are, professionals working in climate change, or scientists. And it just, after the storms that hit us this year, it just felt so necessary, this research, and so important. Because even those who are closest to the theme, the professionals who are working on this, and maybe more so because they're so close to the theme, are getting depressed and getting a bit despondent. And so her work is just so appreciated, and we have to find hope wherever we can. I think that hope without a plan is frankly kind of stupid. That's why I love CCL. CCL has a plan, and I think it's a realistic and attainable plan if we can create the political will that is necessary to make it happen. It also has to be fun for similar reasons. This work is like super heavy duty work. People are attracted to organizations that are fun to be in. And people don't want to just be getting burnt out by how heavy duty climate change work is. So we had a lot of fun in DC, a lot of great food. I think I gained close to 10 pounds probably, going from restaurant to restaurant. This is one of my favorite restaurants. And the person just behind my son there on the right is a UN climate change diplomat who does NDC work. That's nationally determined contribution work in Latin America. He's helping each of those countries to achieve the goals of the Paris Agreement. And he was just delighted to see us. He didn't have any official capacity because the UN needs to be neutral, but just socially. And he did an impromptu climate science class for everybody. That was awesome. So just in conclusion, time and planning are of the essence. Our climate advocacy strategies must conform to the best estimates of climate change timeline, considering the precautionary principle. And here, this graph, there's a lot of graphs that are thrown at people. One of the reasons this is from, it's a little old, it's 2014. I need to get it updated. But basically, what I love about this histogram is that it's simplicity. You look at the 2-degree level there, and you go across, and you see that almost everything's in red. At 1.5 degrees, we still got some yellow left. Got a couple areas where we've hit red already. But keep in mind that I think everybody here probably knows that we're headed right now, as things stand, to 2 degrees somewhere between 2050 and 2060 on business as usual. And this is a graph that I created with the help of a graphic person, which is just taking into consideration, a bit like M-Roads, what is it going to take as a team or teams and coalitions on the human relations side of things, motivation, engagement, dialogue, and collaboration, in order to level off the curves. And there's question marks in each of those because we don't know the answer. That's what my social science investigation is really about. But I do believe that Maine Climate Council and Maine are really leaders, as Peter was saying, on these issues, and that we have a tremendous amount to contribute to this dialogue that's going on across the world. So thank you very much. That's everything.
And we talk to people, including our what they say is like a stone. And it is. And so what we do is we tend to pick on one factor, which is what you've done, where you've got one thing that you want to go and get down to. So you don't follow. The visualization tool is amazingly powerful, because you can take complicated things and render them to very simple, dynamic portrayal of various. So what would happen if you said, okay, we're going to look at the interaction between carbon tax, the fact that the tax entity can't pass the tax on to the consumer. Third, so they have to actually pay it, as opposed to, well, just do what they always do, just pass it on to us. You reduce or redirect the subsidies. These are all variables, and you use the payment to incentivize individuals at whatever scale that you want to change their own behaviors. That is it's not to go buy pizza, it's to buy heat pumps. It's to insulate your house. It's to buy the windows that you need to replace in your home. Now, if you take those 4 things and you put them into a dynamic visualization, your numbers will change so fast, because what you're doing is you're demonstrating the interconnectability of realities. And I think it's a wasted opportunity if you only focus on one. I understand why you do it. Yeah, but it's. I'll just say one more thing.
Sure.
It's not work. I mean, it's sort of, and you take pleasure and gratification in what you've achieved, and God bless. But in the end, even that carbon tax, even in your own visualization, makes almost no difference. No, well, very little.
Well, it makes 5 times the difference of any other single policy. And it's also, I would argue against also it saying that this is one policy. It's because the reason why people haven't talked about it as much is because it's not a policy, it's a meta policy. Is the one thing that we know that we'll do to work, one, across the entire economy, to push down, not just to play whack-a-mole and push down coal and see natural gas go up, or what, push down natural gas and watch oil go up. It works across all of the fossil fuels that create greenhouse gas emissions. And three, it protects the poor and middle income, low and middle income folks, while pushing the burden where the folks who are the most powerful, the reason why there has been so much concerted effort to push against this for so many decades, and they've successfully done it in other countries, but the reason why it's so pushed against here is because there's such powerful forces that are so well funded to get us to do what Dr. Michael Mann says, the 4 big Ds. First, it was deny, there is no problem. Then delay. The problem exists, perhaps, but the scientist needs to be worked out more. Or even worse, delay, because this is going to hurt the economy, right? That's the other big falsity. We know from experience that the Canadians have had a booming economy because of the dividends. 3, then it was distract. Don't listen to Al Gore because he's taking a private jet to the IPCC meetings or the UN, the COP meetings. And then now, and which is particularly motivated towards young people, is the 4th D is doomerism. It is too late to do anything about this. Throw up your hands, like your friend was saying. So I would argue that, you know, the policy, if you start putting stipulations on this, like for instance, and as someone who identifies as fairly progressive, I would want to have a means test to this. Why is it that the rich people are getting dividend checks back? Why is it that we are allowing people to foolishly spend their dividend money on something that's not going to be a heat pump or hot water heater, something like that? You lose what little Republican or conservative support once you start putting those stipulations in place. And it also becomes something where you can game the system. Once I say that I have a certain income level beyond this, I can no longer receive my dividend check, then people can find ways of hiding their income, as well, affluent folks who can play a tax game end up doing oftentimes. So remember, this is, you know, again, no single policy will get us all the way there, but this is the one that will, again, there's a reason why the IPCC has called this a necessary condition for stabilizing the climate. And there's a reason why every other nation in the developed world has done it except for us. But it's an excellent question. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'll just add to that, there isn't a claim by CCL that there's a silver bullet. This is one of 4 policies that CCL is working on. And there's another page that we didn't get to where there's a demonstration of carbon tax combined with permitting, combined with energy permitting, combined with healthy forests, and combined with other legislation that together get us to the goal. It's just that this is, as Peter was saying, it's 5 times more effective than other policies. Did you want to add to that?
No, that's fine. I can bring that up if you want to see it.
But I don't think I would be, I don't know what organization wouldn't describe this as kind of like pieces of the pie or wedges for the solution. I've never seen sophisticated policy that would suggest that there is any silver bullet.
That's right. Yeah, Doug.
Have an online, an ability to mobilize advocacy to some. Can you describe that process? How you sign up for it?
Sure.
And how it works? And
Yeah, the easiest thing, you can go to cclusa.org and it'll give you an opportunity to click join or to learn. You can do cclusa.org/action. I can actually bring up the slide that has a QR code if you want to just do that. Send, do you want to see it? Yeah, so we have sent, parts of what we've been trying to do. Every month, there's a different action depending on what's going on in Congress. Right now, we were given very explicit instructions to not talk about carbon pricing in Congress. It's a divided Congress. It's an election year. Right now, we are trying to build as much. Right now, this was all about upgrading the grid to take in the capacity so that we can maximize what we were promised with the Inflation Reduction Act. if we don't pass some sort of clean energy permitting reform, we are going to be stuck with we're going to lose 80%, up to 80% of the promised emissions reductions that were embedded within the Inflation Reduction Act. But getting back to your question, cclusa.org. I could give you a card. I have cards probably for everybody here. We could just like look onto it. You can also, I'll put it back on the screen so you can see it too. And once you do that, it will allow you to basically get an update once a month saying where you need to send an email to your offices. You can click here. They could make it easier. This month it's a phone call asking for what's called the Prove It Act, which is basically another thing that we were asking for, which is getting the calculations for the life cycle carbon content of all the goods and services that we are importing from our major trade partners, so that we can't offshore emissions. We can't brag about how great the United States is doing because we're no longer making our own steel. We're sending it out to China where they're building a new coal power plant like every so many days or whatever it is. So basically trying to integrate it so that it becomes one global system. But the best thing to do is cclusa.org.
I wanted to add to that. Just one of the things that I really like about CCL is, well, in regard to joining, the process is very straightforward. And so you can sign up in 30 seconds, literally. And they go based on zip code, and then they assign you to one of the 500 chapters around the country. There's over 200,000 volunteers in I don't know if it's the world or the US, but 200,000 volunteers. We have in 70 countries. The intranet system, it takes a little bit more getting used to, but one of the things that I really love about it is that from the leadership standpoint, the chapter standpoint, we have activity reports about very concrete actions that members can do on a monthly basis. We get graphs, so it's like being a basketball player and getting your statistics every game. We get those as chapters, so we can measure progress along all kinds of variables, such as like letters to the editor, meets with Congress people, you name it. So we have very realistic and attainable goals, measurements, et cetera, that then we can feed back to the membership.
Yes. What's your name? Oh, sorry. I shouldn't ask you questions. You should ask us questions.
I'm basically totally confused by the presentation, but it's really complicated. Marty's compromised early. But I can just pick up one question which I kind of wrap my head around. And then there's a general procedural question. I just wonder how you're going to prevent the petrochemical giants who are going to be paying their taxes from passing the tax burden on. I wonder what kind of mechanism you imagine that might be able to prevent that from really happening, and in which case it very quickly becomes a very regressive process, and the poor people are the ones who suffer.
Right. So there may be some confusion. Forgive us if we were opaque about this. There is no way of preventing them from passing the burden down. They're going to eat some of it, but this is not about getting folks to punish the fossil fuel industry with a steeply increasing carbon price, giving the money back to folks, and then calling. This is the reason the carbon price keeps going up is to penalize those fossil fuel extractors. The money goes back to all of us. We are free to use that system to have that money to invest in things to move it away. But it's really about moving the burden from us who's trying to decarbonize to them. We already have the technological, as Adam was saying, the technological know-how to solve this problem. This is a political problem. There are ways of heating your homes without carbon emissions in most parts of the world. We're trying, the carbon price continues to go up until we hit 10% of 1990 levels of CO2 emissions, which is sustainable. Then we have to talk about taking some legacy carbon out. But there is no reason to think that, it's a very simple policy in the fact that the carbon pricing keeps on increasing, just as it has in Canada and in Europe, where there's no, they are going to continue to pass it down onto the fossil fuel. And we want that. So people will be realizing eventually I'm going to want to buy an electric vehicle, or I'm going to, next time my vehicle goes away. But this is the thing that's important to remember. When you think about carbon pricing, if you're like me, the first time this was explained to me, I was thinking that this is going to hit me in the gas tank. It's going to hit me in the number 2 heating oil from the fuel that I keep my home clean, and whatever electrical component. That's the carbon price where it's going to hit me. That is less than 30% of the average American's carbon footprint. More than 70% is in all the embedded carbon footprint that you never think about. The cup of coffee I get in the morning, my vacation photos that I uploaded into the cloud to enjoy later. All these things that have like a gajillion middlemen between where that fuel is pulled out of the ground and where it hits me. And the only way to get at all the middlemen is to have that continue to penalize the continued use of that fossil fuel. Go ahead.
I actually had somewhat the same question that you had, David, and I didn't need to ask it because of that chart that you showed.
Yeah.
About that and how much their own cost increase, because I think that was the point, wasn't it?
That's right.
That any individual household under the system would be expected to have $260 worth more expenses in that first year, but they're getting their, sorry, 273.
Good memory. Yeah.
But they're getting their. So you're right, that the cost is gonna get passed on to individuals, but what you have to do is you have to make sure that individual households get, oh, that's why I got this check for 514, offset that increase.
That's a great point. Yeah, you nailed it. And that's exactly right. So yes. And the point is, you can actually go online to Citizens Climate Lobby, that same website we were showing, or keyword my carbon dividend calculator. And you can actually plug in all of the details about your house, how many cars you have, how much you usually spend on your electricity, for your gas, whatever it might be, and find out this is how much I'm expected to pay an increase next year if this were to become law. This is how much my dividend check is. And Canada, even though I cited it as like this, it has survived 2 national referendums focused against it. And it's been around for a long time. It's gaining in popularity now because, being Canadian, they wanted to distribute that money as efficiently as possible. So they buried it in their taxes. But I don't know about you, I don't read every line item in my taxes to find out how much I got back from my carbon dividend. If I'm seeing the gas prices go up down the corner and I don't see like the actual dividend check coming back, I'm not going to equate it. And that's the way. So even though it's less efficient to distribute it, it's still less than 2% of the administrative cost to actually send this out. But they actually are sending checks in the mail to every Canadian. So that, and it says, instead it used to be Climate Action Incentive Program, really opaque name. Now it's carbon dividend. Your gas prices are going up, but here's the dividend check you've paid for it. So you can continue to just kind of keep the circle going, and you're not going to save any money. Or next time your car dies, you could buy an electric vehicle, and then you're just watching the payments come in.
One other point on this. Correct me if I'm wrong on this, Peter, but I believe, so the graph shows the average household. I believe the households that are below average will see even a greater spread between the benefit that they receive and the cost to them. So in other words, it's like it's reverse regressive, essentially. They relatively speaking, they will make more money off of it than wealthy folks will.
Right. That's right.
So that's one point. Another interesting thing, this comes back from my experience from Bolivia. In Bolivia, we had this thing that was called social carbon. I don't know, maybe some in our audience who have experience in Latin America might be aware of this. So basically the idea is you're going to distribute wealth based on how much carbon you use. So the more carbon the country uses, the wealthier the country gets. This is basically the opposite. It creates the opposite incentive, which is the incentive that we need.
Feeling
Oh, yes.
the Apollo Theater hook.
Yes.
Thank you so much.
Thank
Deb.
you.
Thank you very much.